What about the story with Eric Swalwell? What about the fact that he got a defensive briefing because of an intern termed bundler? Maybe he had a relationship with her. This Christine Fang, or Fang, depending on what country you decide to cover the story in. It turns out that Eric Swalwell was infiltrated when he was a city council member in a surprise win in an election by this woman. She would later place another intern with Swalwell's staff, and yet he says leadership knew all about this. The FBI, when they debriefed him and told him who she was, they still put him on the Intelligence Committee. The Republicans did not know anything about it, and they are outraged at this hour. Here is Eric Swalwell, who thinks he knows the real problem here. Of course, it has nothing to do with the real problem, but here's his attempted spin. Hold on tight.
I was shocked when, just over 6 years ago, I was told about this individual. And then I offered to help, and I did help. And I was thanked by the FBI for my help, and that person is no longer in the country. And I was a little surprised to read about my cooperation in that story, because the story says that there was never a suspicion of wrongdoing on my part. The people who did share classified information were the people who leaked this story. And to do that against a critic of the president, they may think that they're going to silence me. They're not going to silence me.
Nice try. Let's bring in Congressman on the Republican side, Matt Gaetz, a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Oh, is that what they're trying to do, Matt? They're trying to silence him by leaking out a story that he got a defensive briefing from the FBI because China had infiltrated his campaign?
Yeah, you just don't understand, Brian, that Eric Swalwell is here to help. In fact, he wants to help so much in confronting China that he spent years super spreading the lies of the Russia hoax. I don't blame Eric Swalwell for being targeted by foreign intelligence, but I'm old enough to remember when Lev Parnas showed up and made a few donations at Republican events. That was wall-to-wall coverage from the media. That was supposedly like the crime of the century, but when Eric Swalwell engages in a very close relationship with clearly an agent of communist China, well, that's deemed as something we can just accept and move on. My suspicion is you'll continue to hear Republicans very critical.
Well, Congressman, let's take a look at what he just said. He said, whoever leaked this out. Keep in mind, according to the original Axios story back in 2015, the FBI interviewed a whole bunch of people who apparently were part of this influence campaign by the Chinese. And so there are a number of people who know the story. And for him to suggest that the story was classified, where'd that come from?
Well, he also said that his sex life was classified, and I know somewhere Bill Clinton is probably kicking himself, saying, why didn't I think of that when people started asking about my romantic follies? And I'm glad that Democrats are newly frustrated with leaks from the FBI and the Department of Justice. I don't really remember their outrage when General Michael Flynn was being smeared with these leaks that were false, saying that he was somehow improperly engaging with Russia, when in fact, General Flynn was saying that we needed to focus on China, that we needed to disentangle from Russian conflict so we could see China as the rising power it was. Eric Swalwell was in a position to help us focus on that Chinese threat. Instead, he purposefully distracted the country, and he hurt our national security as a consequence.
Well, we remember what happened with Dianne Feinstein. Remember her driver and her gopher in her San Francisco office had ties to the Chinese government and was accused of spying on our country and then giving information to China. So what's the vetting process when these staffers, when you guys have interns or staffers, and how close are they? What conversations do they hear?
Oh, listen, our offices are always a cauldron of ideas and information that comes through our committees. Serving on the Judiciary Committee and the Intelligence Committee, as Congressman Swalwell does, there's a lot of sensitive information. But Ainsley, you bring up a good point. When China seeks America's vulnerabilities, they typically start with the legal ways that they can influence us. And in this particular case, they actually use the campaign finance system to bribe politicians. And I think that shows us a lot about where we could become more resilient.
Congressman, I think it's really fascinating. This guy has got this so full of himself. He thinks President Trump is actually focused on him. Would plan a story in Axios, hardly a friend of the Trump administration, to upend him and hurt his career after the election. So let's see what the media has done with this story. MSNBC forgot to cover it. CNN barely covered it for 3 minutes. ABC, NBC, and CBS, I guess it didn't just make the cut. Congressman, what if it was you? What if there was a former Chinese student who ends up being a Chinese spy that got to the point where the FBI had to intervene and pull you aside and say, I got bad news for you. The woman you may or may not be dating, but was listed as a bundler, well, she's a Chinese spy. What if it was Matt Gaetz?
If I was dating a waitress at a Chinese restaurant, they would be burning a hole through my front door with the mainstream media's, lights and cameras. And it really shows, I think, a desire to go after Republicans at every cause and then to protect Democrats. And sadly, often you get the same double standard from the media reflected in the activities of the FBI and the Department of Justice. When Democrats are targeted by foreign intelligence, they get a defensive briefing. When Republicans are targeted,
like the president?
They get impeachments, investigations, yeah, exactly, and threats of jail time. So it really is a double standard.
Democrats get a defensive briefing and Republicans get offensive media coverage. Congressman, sit right there for just a second because we've got another story we want you to weigh in on that we are following this morning. Hunter Biden, the son of the former vice president, president-elect, confirms that a federal investigation into his tax affairs is going on. Griff Jenkins joins us live with the very latest. This was a bombshell yesterday.
Yeah, it was. Steve Ainsley and Brian, Congressman, good morning to you. This didn't come out during the campaign, but yesterday, Hunter Biden confirming that the Justice Department has been investigating his finances and his overseas business dealings in places like China since 2018. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Delaware looking into his tax affairs. Hunter says this in a statement, quote, I take this matter very seriously, but I am confident that a professional and objective review of these matters will demonstrate that I handle my affairs legally and appropriately, including with the benefit of professional tax advisors. His father's transition team responded almost immediately, saying President-elect Biden is deeply proud of his son, who has fought through difficult challenges, including the vicious personal attacks of recent months, only to emerge stronger. The U.S. Attorney in Delaware, David Weiss, a Trump appointee, refused to comment because it's ongoing, but sources tell Fox News the investigation was predicated in part by transactions in, quote, China and other foreign nations, and it includes looking at that laptop connected to Hunter. President Trump and Republicans, of course, have questioned the potential conflicts of interest between then Vice President Joe Biden and his son, who sat on the board of Ukrainian energy company Burisma. Fox News has learned also that the elder is not a target of the investigation at this time, but Senate Homeland Security Chairman Ron Johnson says he wants to know more.
There have been reports of the Bidens cashing in on the Biden name for many, many years, dating back to when Joe Biden was a senator. But, Hunter said he didn't get a cent. No, he got millions of dollars.
But Johnson says he's no fan of special counsels, doesn't see a need for one right now. Meanwhile, consider this, the investigation could likely go into a Biden presidency. Biden has pledged an independent Justice Department, so it would be interesting to see if he replaces Weiss if and when he becomes president. Brian Ainsley, Steve.
All right, Griff, thank you very much. Let's dial back in Republican Congressman from Florida, Matt Gaetz. So, Congressman, this particular investigation apparently started in 2018. That was a year before supposedly Hunter Biden dropped off the laptop at the Mac Fix-It store there in Delaware. And, of course, apparently the guy gave it to the FBI just about 1 year ago today, actually. And then fast forward into the campaign, and Rudy gets a copy of the hard drive. Where are we with this? Because according to what the New York Post saw on the hard drive, it had documents detailing his business dealings with China and Ukraine, and then, of course, also the Tony Bobulinski stuff. And Tony Bobulinski's the one who said that Hunter Biden was involved with his dad on their business dealings.
Notice that the Biden transition tried to frame this scandal as a dispute about taxes, maybe something an accountant got wrong. The reality is this isn't about taxes, it's about foreign entanglements. It's about selling American influence to the highest bidder, and it appears something the Bidens are quite familiar with. But if in the Trump Justice Department there wasn't vigor to ensure that there was equity and application of the law here, I'm not sure that anyone at the Justice Department right now thinks they're going to make their career by going after Hunter Biden. I also think it's important to know how the media was covering this. Remember, we've got Project Veritas recordings of the editorial calls from CNN where Jeff Zucker, instead of delving into this story, used the Biden laptop existence as a way to smear Fox News, smear the New York Post, smear Breitbart, smear anyone who is telling the American people the truth about the Bidens.
Interesting you bring that up. Watch how the media has downplayed this Hunter Biden story.
He talks about Hunter Biden's hard drive. He talks about conspiracy theories.
Charge is so heinous, I'm not even going to say them.
Talking about the Biden's personal corruption, a little bit about Hunter Biden. Most of those charges unverified.
This whole smear on Joe Biden comes from the Kremlin.
Peddling baseless conspiracy theories about Joe Biden and his son, Hunter.
If you didn't follow it closely, you probably don't quite understand what the hit is.
Rabbit hole of Hunter Biden, which I don't think anybody outside of that world understood last night.
Obviously, we're not going with the New York Post story right now on Hunter Biden.
So,
Handy.
Yeah, this is predicated in part by SARS, which is Suspicions Act reports. The Treasury Department told Fox News that SARS is filed by financial institutions if something is out of the ordinary. So something suspicious, exactly. What do you make of the timing of this, and why do you think that Hunter Biden went to the press and said, I learned about this, and made the big announcement?
Well, remember, SARS are actually how Eliot Spitzer's activities were determined by Treasury. So it is a mechanism that law enforcement uses when they see these high dollar amounts moving around, such that it ought to prompt additional scrutiny and review. But we deserve in this country a media that is honest enough to report the facts, not to try to categorize them as a crazy conspiracy theory. You know, I'm old enough to remember.
Congressman, they couldn't do that before the election.
Well, look, I mean, what we see from the FBI and the Department of Justice is a willingness to leak information before an election if they believe that it will achieve their political purposes. They did plenty of that with the Steele dossier and Donald Trump. So again, it's not about whether or not the Department of Justice and the FBI are political operatives. Right. They seem to be. It's just that they are targeting Republicans, and they seem to be giving folks like Hunter Biden, like, well, what is he, Voldemort? He's the name that cannot be spoken? That seems to be the way the mainstream media treated the story.
Well, put it this way. There's one guy that got unimpeachable integrity, and I dare you to challenge it, Tony Bobulinski. And he uses this term big guy. And I'm just wondering, when his tax attorneys had a chance to itemize the Kazakhstan transactions, the Moscow transactions, the Ukrainian transactions, and the Chinese transaction, if there's a line there for the big guy. Because it's pretty specific what Tony Bobulinski said. And what is amazing is you have CNN's Jeff Zucker says, I don't think we should be repeating unsubstantiated smears just because the right-wing media suggests we should. They're not smears. There's actual emails and interactions with government officials and meetings with perhaps maybe the future president of the United States that's never been asked nor substantially denied. When you have pictures of yourself naked smoking crack and it's not the worst thing on your laptop, you're in trouble. So that is what's on that laptop. And I feel bad for that repair person. There's all this carnage along the way. He took in a laptop. He couldn't get a call back from Hunter Biden, and now he's destroyed, out of business, and he's shuttered. What he did is call the FBI and said, take the hard drive, and then later he got in touch with Rudy Giuliani. And now, after 2018, the FBI is finally emerging, perhaps, with the results of an investigation. Bobulinski sat for between 5 and 8 hours with the FBI to tell what he knows about international transaction with a guy who's constantly recovering from crack addiction, who happens to be the son of the would-be, possibly, President of the United States. And people are saying, we're not going to cover this? This is outrageous. This makes the Facebook, Twitter freezing of accounts look minor.
It's foreign interference. And it's evidenced on this laptop. And the foreign interference isn't even as bad as the domestic interference that occurs when the media tries to frame the discussion and the debate in such a way as to exclude certain subjects as just unavailable for inquiry. And we now have to track these transactions and these relationships to any policy that emerges from Joe Biden as a political leader. It's believed that Joe Biden wants to make the reconstruction of NATO his big priority. That's that's going to require some threat construction around Russia, and we'll see who gets rich, who gets supported. But I think that a lot of it could ultimately be tracked back to the relationships on these laptops, and not just the participation of Hunter Biden in these deals, the participation of Joe Biden. What they're going to do in the next few weeks and months is try to silo this and categorize it as Hunter Biden only and sort of administrative tax issues only, when we know the corruption and the foreign interference goes far deeper.
The big guy. Remember, that refers to Joe Biden.
According to Tony Bobolinsky, and we do know that apparently the FBI and the IRS are both issuing subpoenas, so more people are going to find out that they are in the crosshairs.
Congressman, really quickly, can I ask you a question about Florida, because it's one of the 17 states that filed a brief with the Supreme Court. What's the next step? If the Supreme Court takes this up and says that these 4 states violated the Constitution, that's 62 electoral votes. That could swing the race.
Yeah, the Supreme Court can have original jurisdiction over conflicts among the states. Our arguments from Florida and Texas and elsewhere is that when you allow illegal votes to be counted in states like Wisconsin, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, you dilute the legal votes that have been cast by our state. So it's really no different than if a polluted river was running from one state into another. There would obviously be a need for the Supreme Court to resolve that. Here there are polluted ballots running from some states into our overall election system, and I hope the court exercises its jurisdiction and hears argument.
Before December 14th.
I hope that someday, real soon, we can have you on a day there's something to talk about, unlike today. Another slow news day.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
This is Congressman Matt Gaetz. If you liked that video, make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on social media, and join us on our daily podcast, Hot Takes with Matt Gaetz, on your favorite podcast listening platform.